Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the back doors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex. Today, I want to talk to you guys about zombies. Zombies are some of my favorite monster movies in all of speculative fiction. They're also some of my favorite books, and they have a lot of symbolism involved over the years socially. I also tend to have a lot of zombie dreams. I majored in forensic anthropology, and, I'm not too surprised that I dream about death a lot. I've also been to over 30 funerals before I even moved to Texas in 2011, and have missed and been to numerous ones since. So death is very much a part of my daily life. However, I have a lot of stress dreams or anxiety dreams, and zombies feature prominently in them, as do the zombie apocalypse in general. So today I want to talk a little bit about the symbolism of zombies in fiction and how that really represents our sociocultural situations. I'm going to talk about the book, The Zombie Survival Guide, as well as what dreams about zombies might mean, Zombieland, the movie, and The Walking Dead. And we're also going to talk about the new TV show, Locke and Key, that is out on Netflix. So first up, let's go ahead and knock out Locke and Key. I started this show last night, so I watched, 2 or 3 episodes of it, and so far it's been pretty good. This is specifically going to be about the Netflix TV series. Locke and Key was based on a comic book, and they did a pilot for it in 2011 that was not picked up. It was supposed to be on Fox, I believe, and then they didn't pick it up in the long term. And it has been through several different attempts to be made over the years, including entire recastings except for the role of the little boy, Bodhi. So what is Locke and Key? If you haven't heard of it before, it is a supernatural horror show. It's, dramatic and kind of creepy, and it's largely based, in America. It's about these kids, 3 kids and their mom, who have recently moved back to this old house that their dad grew up in. So in that aspect, it's very similar to October Faction, and indeed, the opening is incredibly similar with the car ride and the mom talking to the kids who aren't really jazzed about moving across the country to this new place. When this happens, they are moving because you find out in the first 10 minutes, so it's not a spoiler, that the dad has recently died. He died in a horrible altercation with another person, and they tell it through a series of flashbacks throughout the show. So the dad was kind of protecting the family and ends up getting shot, and so the family has to move. So they move back to this old place called Key House, and their last name is Locke. So, there's a little bit of punnery going on here, which, I'm pro-punnery. I don't know about you guys. But the whole point is that one of the former students murders the dad, whose name is Rendell. So his wife, Nina, moves with Tyler, who's the oldest son. He is a teenager. I think he's about 16 or 17. He has a car and a license at least, and is out driving after dark, after 9 p.m. So I'm going to say he's 16 or 17. And his sister Kenzie, who is a couple of years younger than him, but also appears to be a teenager. They go to a boarding school interestingly, but they're day students at this boarding school in Matheson, Massachusetts. So they've moved all the way from Seattle to Massachusetts. So like literally across the entire country, across, North American continent. And their little brother, Bodhi, is in elementary school. He looks to be about 10 or so, maybe 12. So he goes to a different school from them as well. And his school starts a week after the older kids. So we mostly are following around Bodhi in this big old house and what he is up to. He goes out on this giant estate property that they own and is checking out like the well house and stuff. And when he starts talking into the well, he's just a kid and fooling around. He's like, echo, echo. And instead, a voice responds to him. And he's like, who are you? Are you my echo? And she says, yes, Bodhi, I am your echo. And it creeps him out. But then he decides to make friends with, whomever this echo is. So the echo tells him about these keys in Key House. And Bodhi starts discovering these keys. She tells them that they whisper to people and that you can hear them, especially if you're special, like Bodhi is. They don't really define, at least in the first few episodes, what that means or how he is special. But he kind of goes on this quest to start hunting down these keys. And then he goes back and tells Echo about them. The keys throughout the house are really interesting in like the same way that Narnia is interesting, or like the Magicians where the Chatwins initially go through like the clock, or where the kids from Narnia go through pictures, like the picture for the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, or through the wardrobe and the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So it has a lot in common in that aspect. Whereas October Faction is more similar to maybe Sanctuary or to Heroes when it comes to, hunting creatures of a certain type, and maybe even supernatural at that point. In this case, Locke and Key is closer to, I would definitely say Narnia, and to the Magicians. But there's definitely Narnia, although there's more horror in this, whereas the Magicians is like adult themed. So, now that you kind of have a sense of the tone for it, there are just a bunch of keys in the house. We don't really know what all of the keys do until we see them being used. And the kids don't necessarily know how to use the keys when they first find them. So it's really fun and super curious as to, how each of these is going to work. Because once you have the key, then the keyhole naturally pops up, or the lock will pop up. It could be in a mirror. It could be in someone's body, like on the back of their neck. And it could even just be, sticking the key into an actual keyhole within a lock. It's pretty interesting how it works. And they're all used in magical ways. So it's not necessarily that the keys are good or bad. But, in Narnia, they're just kind of neutral. They just allow you to enter into this other place. But it's, more similar to the Magicians in this way, where it's not necessarily everything being as you thought it was, and things start getting really creepy really fast. So I do enjoy the horror component in this. As I've discussed with you guys before, I'm more into like monster horror than a lot of the other types. So this appeals to me, and it's like spooky and a little bit creepy. And the artistic tone and visual style of the show, a lot of blue tones. It's really pretty. And it also focuses on these kids working through the trauma of being there when their father passed. The mother is also working through the trauma. And so I really like how they show that at these different ages. So you have a kid who's like elementary aged, and then you have a girl who is, probably 14 or 15, and then the older brother who is 17, and so he's now the man of the house, and he feels a lot of masculine responsibility for what happens to the family. And then, you also have the mom who was there and saw everything. So they're all, fighting those demons in their own ways, and I think that that's really psychologically interesting, and it's great for the character development because they all have some form of insecurity of not being able to be enough or do enough to save their dad. And we see that in a lot of games and a lot of movies. And I think that, there's definitely good ways to do it and, not so great ways to do it. And they do a really good job in this way. A lot of times it's, we start out with one hero who has lost someone important to them, prior to the show starting. But in this case, it is 4 different people who are approaching these problems and their new lives in totally different ways. And I think that they are doing a really great job in, kind of looking at the internal motivations of the characters as well as externally what's happening to them and seeing how they approach learning about these keys when they didn't really believe in this stuff before as they go along. Now, there is also like a demonic entity component here. So it's not just horror, it's like demonic horror. So that can be really fun. And, they haven't labeled them as demons per se yet in the first 3 episodes. But if you're familiar with the comics, you know where they're going with that. But, they're not the only ones looking for the keys. That's kind of the fun part of it too. There is something malevolent also going on. So it's not just them looking for the keys, but they have a really good reason to find them. They have a lot of really interesting characters in this show. And I really like, their friends that they develop along the way. And, you see these kids, they have PTSD and they freak out a little bit. And how their different friends handle it is really interesting. So on October Faction, when Liv freaks out and, they do the seance, people react really negatively, whereas in this case, people tend to act more compassionate like the friends do in the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. They're more supportive. They're still kind of weirded out, but they are supportive. So I think it's really interesting and it's a good new development for, this era we're experiencing where we're getting all of these different shows about speculative fiction. And a lot of them have a ton in common, but they are approaching things in different ways. And I enjoy that as well. This one more fully embraces the horror aspect of it and, the magical components. Whereas with October Faction, the kids are like, everything can be explained with science, and it's more like a government entity in, keeping everything safe. This is just a normal family, though, with Locke and Key. And they're just kind of trying to figure stuff out on their own. So there are a lot of similarities between the two, but I think there are enough differences to really make it truly interesting and to let them shine on their own. A lot of folks haven't really loved this yet, but I like it so far. I don't think that it's the best ever, but so far it's been really interesting and I'm excited to see where they take it. Y'all know I don't really want to stop at just, the first couple of episodes. It takes at least a season for shows to get their feet under them. Indeed, it took, Star Trek Enterprise 3.5 seasons to really get its legs under it, but by then it had pretty much been canceled. But, they didn't have a real villain until 3.5 seasons into Star Trek Enterprise. So once they had their overarching villain and their overarching plot line, it started to really come together. But unfortunately, the Beauty and the Beast episode and stuff that all came before that kind of drug it into the ground before it could really shine. With Locke and Key, though, it is ran by Carlton Cuse. So I'm really excited about that. He did Lost and one of my personal favorites, Nash Bridges. So Nash Bridges is not speculative fiction, but it ran from 1996 to 2001. And I very much enjoyed that show with Don Johnson in it. And I believe also Yasmine Bleeth was in as well, and Cheech Marin. So it was a really fun cop show. And he also was involved in martial law with Sammo Hung. That one only ran for about a year, but it was good. Carlton Cuse, you might recognize him from the movie Rampage that came out in 2018. And also, Bates Motel, he did that one. He did The Strain, The Returned, Colony. So he's done a lot of really fun projects. And that's really where he kind of seems to be coming from with each of these things, is bringing these horror stories or these kind of comedic shows to life in different ways. I'm a big fan of his work, so I was stoked to see his name pop up. All right, we're going to go on a break, and when we come back, we're going to delve into the world of zombies, starting with Resident Evil Afterlife.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Before the break, we were talking about the new TV show, Locke and Key, that's based on the comic series, and it is out on Netflix as of about 3 days ago. So now we're going to talk about Resident Evil Afterlife, because most of this episode is going to be about zombies. Now, I know a lot of folks have a lot of feelings about the Resident Evil franchise, particularly when it comes to the games versus the movies. I know a lot of y'all don't like Alice because she wasn't in the games and you're just not a fan. And that's totally fine. I respect that. But I like both. Yes, I have played the games. Yes, I have also seen the movies. I look at it like I look at a lot of things that are remakes of comics or, books or video games. It's like an alternate timeline. That's all. And it can be kind of fun. I enjoy seeing the characters from the games pop up in it, and I really enjoyed that in Resident Evil Afterlife. We get to see both Claire and Chris Redfield in the story, and it's fun, in my opinion. And we get, some craziness with Wesker, who is, extra evil, extra crazy. So in this one, Resident Evil Afterlife came out in 2010, and it really addressed, all the clones that they found in Resident Evil Extinction. So, there were a lot of Alice clones, and we're like, okay, great, what are we going to do with all these clones? I guess we'll make a movie about it to kind of wrap it up. So we all thought Resident Evil Extinction was going to be the last film in the series for a long time. But, they were like, heck, we're just going to try Afterlife. Now, Afterlife wasn't entirely necessary, really, and it picks up very shortly after, Claire and Kmart and all of them have flown up north to go and look for, the safe zone that they think is like in Alaska. So Alice and all the other Alices have gotten together, and the first 10 minutes is really just all of the Alices planning an assault on one of the Umbrella compounds. So they just, you keep seeing Alice's dying and you're like, oh, this is wacky. But, it's just all the clones. So they take everything over and they try to go ahead and kill Wesker in them because a lot of the Umbrella bosses are still alive and they're in those underground fortresses still messing around with science. One of my favorite quotes is that, science tells us, that we can still make dinosaurs and how to do it. Social science tells us why that's a bad idea. It seems like Umbrella has a lot of scientists and not enough social scientists. So they're down there doing more shenanigans, making dogs that split apart at the top of their faces and become these really weird zombies. So they're not just regular zombie dogs, they are just extra gross and weird. That's Wesker's brand. It's very on brand for him. So Alice is trying to really focus on taking down Wesker. He's the primary antagonist at this point in the film series, and we met him in the games too. So she does get her butt kicked by Wesker, and he ends up injecting the real Alice, the original, not one of the other clones, with a serum that really kills off the T-virus cells in her body and essentially turns her human, is the basic plot line of this. So it's taking away a lot of her abilities to really combat the virus as far as Wesker is concerned. And he's like, yes, this is really great, and I'm going to be able to take her out now. And it's meant to be a really neat twist. Alice has, been struggling with not being really fully human for a long time. And in the film right before this one, she's like, okay, well, at least I have superpowers, kind of. But now she's just a human woman again, which is really interesting. But they kind of just leave that thread there. Alice seems, grateful to be human again. And then we just never really talk about it again. So if you were late to that film, you would really not even know that Alice was depowered. She's still doing her acrobatics throughout the rest of the film. She is still BA with, her firearms and everything, and is doing stuff like landing a biplane on top of, a small building. I think a lot of the characters in this one are really underutilized, but that is not, I didn't get to write the show. That's fine. It's probably for the best. But that's my personal opinion. The film keeps going, and a lot of the established characters just get thrown under the bus, more or less, and we don't really see what happened to a lot of the other survivors. They do find the Arcadia, though, so that was, kind of a plot hole from the last one. Not really a plot hole, but we didn't know exactly what Arcadia was or where it was, just that it was supposed to be safe, kind of like Pacific Playland in Zombieland. And they found the Arcadia, but it turns out it's been moving, and that is because it is a ship. It was towards Alaska, but it's moving, along the coast and blasting out this message that, hey, it's safe to be here. There is no virus here. There are no zombies. Come over here and be safe with us in Arcadia. But much like the terminal area in, Walking Dead, turns out Arcadia is not so safe. Just like Pacific Playland's not so safe. But in this case, it's closer to Walking Dead because Arcadia is not only just not safe, but it's really a trap. It is deliberately set by Umbrella to get more people to do, gross research on. And it's really problematic that, our heroes step into that. But the pacing for it is just kind of odd, I think. However, if you're familiar with Latin, there is a brief reference to et in Arcadia ego. I'm probably butchering that Latin. But that really means that, it might be too good to be true. It usually is used in Latin to mean like, even in utopia, death still exists. But more or less, it's just being like, hey, this is a trap. It's just a flag to let people who are down with Latin know that it is a trap. But, it's not colloquially used enough to really be useful in any way. It's just a fun bit of trivia for the most part. So our characters end up, on the Arcadia. I like the kind of the town scene, but we don't really do anything with a lot of the zombies that are there. They just, land the plane there, and then, the plane is used by a bad guy to get away, and everybody else has to plow through the zombies with, the plan is to go through with the truck and everything, and they end up, going through tunnels. It's fun, but it doesn't utilize fully one of my favorite characters, so that's a big bummer. We also spend a lot of the time with Claire not really knowing who she is or what happened to her. And we don't really find out immediately what's going on, so it's just kind of mysterious for not really much of a good reason. It's just so that Claire pretty much doesn't, so Claire doesn't recognize Chris, and so that she can't tell us what happened to the Arcadia. It's just kind of a convenient plot device, more so than anything else. So I didn't really love it, but I also didn't hate it. It was just kind of meh, in my opinion. But we meet Chris in that building that Alice and Claire land on in the biplane, and he's been caged in there, and they say that they found him already in the cage, so they kept him in the cage, which is a very funny concept, and it's very human in a lot of ways. So I do enjoy that aspect of it, where they're like, nah, man, this guy was in the cage when we got here, so we kept him here, even though this is a prison. And Chris has maintained this whole time that, you know, he was part of a military engagement meant to fight the zombies and everything, and that the prisoners stuffed him in there because they thought it would be funny. I don't know. The anthropologist in me thinks that that's very funny just because it is so incredibly human. It's like when you go somewhere and you see a lot of people standing in a line, and so you get in the line, and then you're like, wait a minute, why are we in line right now? And I learned about that in my anthropology classes, so I'm, you know, just kind of more cognizant of that in general. So whenever I see that happening, I'll go and check out what's going on and why we're actually waiting. And that's happened a lot, you know, waiting for classes to start in the morning, because people just assume that the door is still locked if you get there before 8 o'clock for the first class. And I cannot tell you how many classes over the years, because I was in college for, oh gosh, I feel like forever. Like 3 years for community college, 2 years for my bachelor's, and then another 2 for grad school, so like 7 years. And there were so many classes that we just stood outside of waiting for, or I would get there and there would just be so many people sitting on the ground or waiting in line. I'm like, what are we waiting for? And they're like, you know, waiting for somebody to unlock the door. And I'm like, nope. I would check it. And I'm like, the door is open, you guys. You could be sitting in a chair. It's just funny to me in general. So, you know, I think that that is particularly funny in this movie. Now, you know, Chris recognizes Claire. Claire doesn't recognize Chris. And so she goes to kick his butt. It's very funny too. And then, you know, it's a very much still a sibling interaction, in my opinion, even though she doesn't recognize him, and she very much would have, you know, just killed him if Alice hadn't really stepped in. But it's kind of funny in that way too, just like watching somebody put their brother in a headlock. And then we find, you know, a bunch more survivors, and we get that really cool scene with the giant zombie with the big old axe. And it's so fun with, you know, how he almost takes both Claire and Alice down. He is hardcore. It takes a lot to put him down and keep him down. And everyone's freaked out because they are just emptying clips into his head. They're doing the headshots and everything, and he is just not going down until Claire gets Alice's, you know, her pistol or whatever, and goes ahead and blows a hole through the middle of his head, like Full Metal Jacket kind of style. It's not a Full Metal Jacket, but that is the kind of outcome where it like blows a grapefruit sized hole through his head. So that was kind of fun too, with getting to see that. And then they go to the boat, and we just spend a lot of time on the boat. The pacing seemed really good for, you know, the scenes that were inside of the building and the structure. And it was fun seeing Alice jump from the top of that building and swing through on the cable without, you know, pulling a full Gwen Stacy from, you know, the Spider-Man 2 with Andrew Garfield, where it totally just snaps her back in a scene reminiscent of the comic book bridge scene. That was interesting, but I'm like, you know, that would have killed her in real life or paralyzed her, especially since, as we remember, Alice is depowered at this point. So she's allegedly depowered, but she's still totally fine the entire time. So, I mean, whatever. She might as well not have been depowered. And, you know, we know that it's Chris Redfield as we're watching this, because if you play the games, you're like, oh yeah, it's Chris. And we've been waiting for Chris to pop up. But they just refer to him as Chris for so long without saying Redfield that it's just like, geez, this is forever. But I think in a way that's similar to Zombieland, and how, you know, last names don't really matter in the zombie apocalypse. What do your familial connections really mean when half of the world is undead and then like another quarter is just dead? So that is where we are at this point. We get to see an underwater level, so that's kind of fun. And, you know, overall, it's not a terrible movie. Did it need to be made? Not really. We wrap up all the clone stuff in the first 10 minutes. And then we really waste that girl who was a swimmer originally. I think her name was like Crystal Waters or something like that. But, it's her stage name and all that jazz. So, they wasted her with, her, swimming ability. And it's like, sure, she made it down there with Chris and the depowered Alice. But, now we're just gonna kill her with the zombies. And they also wasted Luther for a lot of it. Luther is BA, and I wanted to see some more of him. It's nice that he does survive through the tunnels, but I was really bummed that we didn't get to see a lot more of him kicking butt. I mean, this dude, pulled the tail end of the biplane back down because he was so strong and kept it from going over the edge of the building. Now, I get that they might not want to keep him there because he could, kick butt, but he's not like Lubu overpowered from Dynasty Warriors and Warriors Orochi. He's just a super strong dude. Luther couldn't take down that giant zombie guy either on his own. But, he was a super cool character. I liked how he was, he had wholesome masculinity going on, but could still, kill creatures with the best of them. He was just a cool guy, and I think that he was very underutilized. I digress, though. We're going to go ahead and go on a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the social significance of zombies.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. In our last segment, we were talking about Resident Evil Afterlife and my personal thoughts about it. Now we're going to talk about the social significance of zombies. So, zombies, you might think today just means, we're scared of zombies. We're afraid of the living dead, and it's associated with our fear of death. And I would say, to a certain extent, that can be considered to be true, at least on a surface level. I think that, in the United States especially, for the most part, we're really far departed at this point from how we process our dead, how we handle them after they die. In a lot of different cultures, people go ahead and process their family members dead. They wash and bathe the deceased and, treat them with a lot of respect. They'll redress them if that is part of that culture. In Appalachia and a lot of places, we still dig the graves ourselves for our loved ones when they're deceased. And it really just helps you be mindful, I think, of the process of death. And it helps in the mourning process and really seeing that the person has died. But in a lot of places in the U.S., we, pump people full of formaldehyde. And if that's your option, that's your choice, I respect that. I just look at it a little bit differently. I'm more of a fan of natural burials, and that's why I like forensic anthropology decomposition programs, because you can just have your body laid out on the ground and decompose naturally. No, additives to your body. Nothing, added like formaldehyde and chemically altered in any way. Nobody's putting makeup on you and stuff like that. And that just appeals to me more. Now, that said, zombies are a big part of our fear base in a symbolic way. We're not just, kind of departed from the death process and concerned about the living dead coming back to kill us and stuff like that. But it can also be representative of terrorism, immigration, global warming, pandemics. So we notice that in a lot of these zombie games, they are coming after us, and it's viral based. That's part of like the whole thing with the T virus is, it's communicable. It is a disease. So pandemics like cholera or, the flu epidemic of 1918 or Ebola, all that jazz, it can be symbolic of our fears of communicable diseases or economic collapse or just the random way that suddenly life goes sideways, like when our friends are in car accidents or there's random gun violence or rogue nuclear weapons just kind of popping off or, meltdowns like Chernobyl and all that stuff. Zombies can really encompass any of those things. Vampires and werewolves are more straightforward in what they symbolize, in my opinion, but there's been a lot of sociocultural discourse over the years and literary discourse as to what zombies really symbolize. And when we think of apocalypses, we don't tend to think of a werewolf apocalypse or a vampire apocalypse, although with Van Helsing, the TV show, it is kind of a vampire apocalypse in that way, in which a volcano and all of this ash has settled and allowed the vampires to walk around without exposure to the sun and start killing people. And I like that in concept, but it's just less compelling, in my opinion, in my personal experience, than the zombie apocalypse. It's like our quintessential type of apocalypse that is supernatural in nature. And it just really reminds us that, people are sheep in a lot of ways. They are just mindless animals that are driven by base instincts. And it can be, symbolic of sexual violence in that way as well, where people are just essentially acting like animals. And that makes it really fascinating for me. Now, we have a lot of zombie movies and TV shows out now. We have The Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead, which I actually kind of like more at this point. We have the really fast ones that are runners, like in 28 Days Later. We also have the huge variation of them in the Resident Evil series, both the games and in the movies. And that can be a lot of fun and super creative. We have comedies now with Shaun of the Dead, and then also some of the darker ones with like Dawn of the Dead, Land of the Dead, all that jazz. So there is a lot of interest in zombies, and in 2007, a man named Matt Mock founded the Zombie Research Association with some world-renowned scientists and academics from Harvard, and they were trying to raise the level of zombie scholarship in the arts and sciences. So this group really believes that the zombie apocalypse isn't a matter of if, but more of a matter of when. And I think that that's really interesting and fun to entertain. As a forensic anthropologist or someone who is forensic anthropology trained, I am not so sure about that. There's a lot that would have to go on in order to make that tenable as a virus. A lot of viruses that spread as rapidly as zombie-type viruses are portrayed tend to burn out quickly. Like a lot of the Ebola viruses tend to burn out before it can really hit critical mass of infecting everyone. They work really quickly. It has a high mortality rate, but it also burns out very quickly. So in that way, it's really interesting. A lot of the zombie type of behaviors have a lot in common with like furious rabies. So that's really fun, and where furious rabies and rabies in general make the creature that has been bitten go ahead and, want to bite other people, and it makes them afraid of water in a lot of ways. So it makes you both attracted to and repelled by different elements. I think that can be really fun. I am also very interested by the concept of zombies essentially like hunting people by smell or by scent, because you see a lot of that in like The Walking Dead where they're like, oh yeah, let's cover ourselves with zombie guts, and then they're not going to be able to smell us. Kind of like how in Land of the Lost, they go to cover themselves with hadrosaur urine. It's funny, but it's very interesting because of what it's really saying about the zombies and how they kind of hunt and how they are aware, and that, their vision might not be great, but they are able to still smell. but I guess taste doesn't bother them because they'll eat dead animals and they'll eat dead humans, and it doesn't matter how long they've been dead for a lot of them. I don't know. We see some zombies eating roadkill in addition to zombies eating, fresh humans. So I don't know. I think it's really interesting to see how different zombie movies and games take that into effect and, looking kind of at the zombie diet. Now, if you are not a believer in the zombie apocalypse like Matt Mock and the other people from the Zombie Research Association, you can really view this as a metaphor for a lot of fears, and it's really just easier to think of them as zombies, very similar to how sci-fi helps us work our way through our feelings about sociocultural and sociopolitical issues by giving us a measure of distance so that proximity is not blinding. So it's easier to think about zombies than to just fully face on war and destruction and famine and pestilence and death and, the terrible tragedies and trauma that people die with and having never told anyone. So these monsters kind of, break out of our nightmares and walk around with us. They're like a manifestation of our anxieties and our fears. Now, the author of World War Z and the Zombie Survival Guide, Max Brooks, has also said that, you have to believe that this could happen. They're a very fun tool for exploring apocalyptic fears. A lot of people are afraid of the apocalypse. That's why we have a lot of dystopian stories. We have the factions associated with the Divergent series. We also have, the electromagnetic pulse style apocalypse that we find in James Cameron's Dark Angel. There are so many different types of, apocalyptic dystopias, and we see them play out in different ways. There are a lot of things in our world that are way scarier than zombies, but they can be taboo for us to talk about. A big discussion about the AIDS pandemic could, make people feel uncomfortable and make them want to leave. But if you talk about zombies, then people are more likely to engage with you. So using these as metaphors and as allegories helps us to consider the world around us and to really, work our way through processing some of our emotions related to these scary components of life. And they say that, popular culture makes world politics what it currently is. That is a quote from Tufts professor Daniel Dresner. And he really posits that if that is true, then international relations needs to think about armies of the undead in a more urgent manner. So there's a lot of different varieties of realism, but as Dresner says, all realists start with a common assumption that anarchy is the overarching constraint of world politics. Now, if you're interested in reading more of that article by Mr. Dresner, Professor Dresner, that is in Night of the Living Wonk Toward an International Relations Theory of Zombies. So a lot of international relations and other cousins of cultural anthropology like to take that into account as well. In the early 20th century, anthropologists started taking voodoo more seriously, and we thought that, maybe you could do that with the tetrodotoxin that, you found in pufferfish and the concombre zombie or the zombie cucumber that is utilized in voodoo and, make people wake up from, essentially a nap where you're paralyzed and aware, but you're not able to do anything else, but you are kind of in a drugged haze and make you willing to perform certain acts, including, just simple farming enslavement to killing people for you. It's very interesting how it has kind of morphed over the years. And, we started with these slow zombies, and then we have these fast zombies running around. At one point, zombies were, a mirror for, the fact that people who are white or European were afraid that they weren't going to have control over anything anymore with the downfall of colonialism within the United States. So they were more afraid of, immigration at that point. So those kind of racist viewpoints really still exist. They just look a little bit different now. But zombies have always been able to stand in and represent it. When we were in the Vietnam War, zombies were a reflection of our fear of the military-industrial complex. We were afraid of the government, and we were afraid of guerrilla warfare, just like you were afraid of zombies trying to eat us. So from everything from the Bay of Pigs to the Cold War, we can look at that and see a metaphorical zombie component in it. There are a lot of really fun anthropology articles about that, as well as literary articles. Zombie fiction is really good, and my favorite portrayals of it are when they aren't really about zombies. They're more about how we're afraid of, racism and immigration as an extension of racism, and, how diseases spread. Everybody's freaking out about the coronavirus right now, and it's very similar to how people freak out about, the zombie pandemics in these video games and these comics and movies and other works of fiction. About how, The Walking Dead isn't really about, the zombies being the Walking Dead, but how we lose our humanity when we are put into these situations where we're fighting for our survival. It's all very interesting to me, and if you're also interested in it, please hit me up. I want to hear from you guys about your favorite theories related to zombies, and if you have some really cool articles, literary or anthropological, about symbolism of zombies in everyday life, I would love to hear from you guys on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. We're going to go on another break. When we come back, we are going to talk about Max Brooks' The Zombie Survival Guide.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome back. In our last segment, we were talking about symbolism of zombies in everyday social life and how they kind of represent a lot of our fears on screen in a way that we're able to, process our emotions and really parse it out. So next, I want to talk to you about the Zombie Survival Guide. It's called The Zombie Survival Guide, Complete Protection from the Living Dead, and it was written by Max Brooks. So Max Brooks is the son of Mel Brooks. So if you guys are familiar with old comedies, Mel Brooks was absolutely hilarious, and his son seems to have inherited that funny bone from his dad. So Max Brooks also used to work as a Saturday Night Live author, or, a contributor who would do a lot of writing for them. And in 2003, he published this kind of fictional survival manual that helps us think about all the different types of zombie realities we could be looking at. It's, a 7-chapter book plus an appendix, and it's really fun because it's funny, but it also takes itself a little seriously in some ways, or at least it's presenting it in a serious manner. So the first chapter is Myths and Realities, and it's like giving you the rules and like the background information that you would need to know further along in the book. So you can't really skip around in this one, even if it is a survival guide. Definitely start with chapter 1. And, it describes this particular virus. So we're going with the virus conferred zombification in this book. And they refer to it as the Solanum virus. So that's one that I've seen used in other books as well. And they talk about how it's spread and how you treat it if you get infected, and why it's limited to humans when people are bitten by these zombies. Why, if the zombie, bites an animal, it doesn't turn the animal into a zombie. It's really fun, and this is also the author of World War Z. So if you are a fan of that book or of the TV show and you haven't read the Zombie Survival Guide, go ahead and check it out. It's really fun. They also refer to it as African rabies or the walking plague or the blight, if you are familiar with that universe of these books. The way that solanum works is it gets introduced into the body and is viral, but they don't really fully explain how the host turns into a zombie after it's introduced. The virus is just said to use the brain cells in the frontal lobe for replication, and it destroys them in the process. So if you have watched any of the Hannibal Lecter movies, he talks about eating the frontal lobe and how that's where your manners are. I believe the Mads Mikkelsen TV series also references that, and how he'll eat that part of the brain. And in the movie, it's, I think it's not Silence of the Lambs, but I think it's actually Hannibal, where Clarice is having dinner with Hannibal, I believe as Julianne Moore, and Ray Liotta is the one whose brain is being eaten, and he's just, suddenly very rude and crude and saying sexual things to her because our frontal lobe is where a lot of our, essentially our cultural manners and stuff are displayed. When you shouldn't say things and when you should say things and what's not meant for particular contexts and, how nice you are to people versus how aggressive. So in this case, it's just, loosely based on that science and saying, hey, this virus, chews up the frontal lobe of the brain. And the way viruses work is they go in and they replace their cells, or our cells rather, with their own cells. They go inside of our cells and turn our own cells into their cells for replication. That's how Ebola works. And similarly, this is how the solanum virus is meant to work in Max Brooks's, fictional reality. So, I don't know about what happens to the rest of the brain. It just kind of eats up the frontal lobe for replication, and it destroys those brain cells, just like other viruses do to the human body. After the brain's infected, the bodily functions, including the heart and the lungs, go ahead and stop working, and you lose your personality and individuality in the process. So that's very similar to Ebola, in my opinion. So there's part of Ebola that results in depersonalization, and you kind of lose a lot of, your individuality and your ability to respond to people. And then, part of your muscles and your skin kind of detach from each other and your face kind of goes slack. And it doesn't get that far with people who have Ebola aren't going to try and eat you per se, but it is also a virus where it turns your own cells into their cells. And that's also why some forms of Ebola are transmissible over the placental barrier. They're teratogenic in nature and can result in, turning the fetal cells into viral cells, and then it causes a spontaneous abortion. And not like the abortion is in the medical kind, which you go in and have a doctor do, but like a miscarriage, where it's just literally an aborted pregnancy. It's a pregnancy that is no longer happening and it's ejected from the body. When they had the big Ebola viruses in the African continent, a couple decades ago, not the most recent ones, but way before, they went into one hospital that was there and the maternity ward was just covered in blood everywhere. And it was, where they had these spontaneous abortions because the virus had crossed the placental barrier and just ejected essentially just clumps of viral cells all over the place. And they just could not save these women or their babies. That is also kind of how the different types of zombie viruses are portrayed in movies where we see baby zombies, where the babies haven't been bitten and turned into zombies, but rather the mom has been bitten and then ends up birthing a zombie baby. So it's something that would have to cross the placental barrier, and I think that's why we see it in viral form a lot. Now, we also see, the viral incubation period being really variable in, Max Brooks's universe in general. Some people, turn really rapidly, and then others don't turn for a significant amount of time. And they, might be getting them from open cuts and not just clearly visible bites, so they're getting the saliva in there. So it's really interesting how it works. And in his time frame, it's like you get pain and discoloration in the immediate area in like the first hour, and the wound goes ahead and clots. And then by hour 5, you're having like up to 103-degree fever and vomiting and dementia, joint pain, things that would normally accompany fever. By the 8th hour, you get numb parts of your body and the infected area. So the blood flow is moving away from your hands and feet and the infected area and towards another part of your body, probably the brain, I would say, since it is chewing up those brain cells. And you get like a fever in excess of 104 degrees. So it's making it to where you are not really lucid and you're getting dementia and you don't have any muscular control. And then hour 11, paralysis, overall numbness, and a slowed heart rate. And it does specify paralysis in the lower part of the body, which makes sense. And then you are in a coma by hour 16. By hour 20, your heart stops and you have no brain activity. And then by hour 23, you get reanimated. So within a day, essentially, these bites are killing people in the Max Brooks universe. And I like how he really lays that out for us so we know the type of zombie that we are looking for. And it's a lot more, I don't know, I like that he kind of tries to base it a lot in science. It's really fun. It's very reminiscent of rabies and, ring viruses and thread viruses. I think it's fascinating. I took molecular and cellular biology in college, and a lot of it just, makes me really excited because I'm like, okay, I see where you're coming from with this. You have thought about this a lot. So in the Max Brooks universe, he also kind of talks a lot about avoiding the undead, and then if you can't avoid them, then how to fight for them. He also breaks it into like different classes of outbreaks. So a class 4 outbreak is like your doomsday scenario where everything is shifting in the zombies' favor and they're more likely to win. So it's very similar to Land of the Dead in that way. But as he goes on, he's like, these are good places to hide. These are bad places to hide. Here's why you might want to try an oil rig. Here are the limitations of the oil rig. Here are the environmental limitations. Here's what happens if we have these type of zombies. And he's also like, this is where you should go out and, send people out. And as a forensic anthropologist, I think that that's really fun as a concept because it's like, how long does it take these bodies with this virus in them to decompose? How many waves of zombies are we looking at? So, if it takes the first wave this many years to decompose in this climate zone, then there's this versus that. So I've worked in a couple of different decomposition facilities in different climate zones in the United States. And it's very interesting how very different they are. So the one in Texas versus the one in Western North Carolina that I was involved with really decompose differently just based on the climate. They're only 20 hours apart by a drive, and it's like a 5-6 hour flight. It's not bad at all, but it's very different in a lot of ways. So if you keep that in mind, cold weather is going to be different. We found a lot of preserved human remains and other types of animal remains up on high mountains and in icy locations because it acts like a freezer where it preserves a lot of the tissue in that way. So with zombies, if you have freezing and thawing events, then you could, theoretically have zombies that are out there for a lot longer than they normally would be. Or if they're in a very, warm, wet environment, then they are going to, probably decompose faster. Whereas if they're in a dry, arid environment, they're going to desiccate more. So they're going to look kind of like mummies at that point. So if we think about it and you have to have a lot of, actual working muscle tissue in order for them to get around, because, that's how our bodies move. That's how locomotion works in the human body and biomechanics. You do need muscles for that. You can't just be bone. Then they're not going to be able to move around. They might still, have a lot of brain matter in there because you can be mostly desiccated on the outside and still have quite a bit of brain matter within the cranial vault, but they're not going to, really be able to move around much. So I just think that that's really fascinating, and I like how Max Brooks kind of thinks about it all the way around. He's like, this is what happens, if the zombies are dead in the water. And, at first bodies are going to float as they have those gases that are emitted from putrefaction and autolysis being released. And then, they're going to sink. But also a lot of times, if you have a body in the water and it's decomposing, fish are going to eat at the hands, the face, and the feet first. So these zombies might not even have anything to grab with, but they might have teeth at that point. Max doesn't go that far in depth into it. That's just something I know from, my schooling as well. But I like, all the attempts that he did make into that, and he put a lot of research into it. And it's just a lot of fun. So he's like, they could be on the bottom of the water. So you need to be careful with that. If you're in a boat, there could still be zombies, even if they're not floating and you can't see them. It's fun all around. He talks about the pros and cons of choosing like a prison for your location versus choosing, like the oil rig I talked about, or the boat, and how you have to think about things like boat maintenance. Not only do you know how to drive the type of boat that you have, or like steering or helming it, but do you know how to take care of it? Because it does matter. You have to keep your boat clean. It can get degraded from, different things that are in the water that are chemically affecting it. So overall, I really love this book. I think that if you haven't read it, you should totally check it out. It was so much fun, and I think that you guys would probably really like it if you're as into zombies as I am. All right, we're going to go another break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Zombieland and The Walking Dead.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
In our last segment, we were talking about the Zombie Survival Guide by Max Brooks, author of World War Z as well, and how he kind of goes in depth as to what to expect in different scenarios for, a zombie apocalypse. It's both humorous, but also very well thought out, and it's a lot of fun. So I highly recommend you check it out. Now we're going to talk a little bit about Zombieland versus The Walking Dead. So, I really love both of these movies and shows, these universes, and they're very different from each other. Zombieland is very funny, but it's also, very heartfelt and human in a lot of ways, whereas The Walking Dead is about how people lose their humanity as they try to survive in a world with the undead. So that one is way more dramatic, and, we have Rick asking questions like, how many people have you killed? How many zombies have you killed? How many walkers have you killed? Before he, really lets people in. He has his big 3 questions. And when Rick does that, it really just shows how people don't trust each other anymore, because you can't. Theoretically, in a lot of zombie apocalypse situations, or any apocalypse situations really, you're going to see a lot of, degrading of, or erosion of our humanity, where we don't have these cultural mores to hold us accountable anymore. Who's afraid of cops in a zombie apocalypse? Cops are like your last concern at that point. You aren't worried about being held accountable for your crimes. You're just worried about surviving from day to day. And it doesn't matter who you have to, hurt or who you have to manipulate in order to make sure that you and yours are taken care of. It's really a reduction back to our base instincts and kind of a parallel de-evolution in, the zombies are going through it in like a biological type of way, in a chemical way, whereas, the living humans are experiencing it in a cultural way. And it's very nature-nurture in that aspect, which I absolutely love. And you're just kind of seeing it happen parallel. So the zombies lose their humanity by losing their higher brain functioning, particularly, in that frontal lobe. But, these other people who are still alive, it's happening to them culturally. They're learning experientially that they cannot trust anyone anymore. You have people in The Walking Dead, like at the terminal, who are, being cannibals and hunting people. You have the governor telling everyone that this is a really safe place to be, but it's not. You have people lying to you and saying that they haven't been bitten when they have, and then they die in the middle of the night while everyone's sleeping, and people who should be on guard aren't actually paying attention in like a real Tora type of scenario. And you end up infecting everyone. And it's just mayhem. So you can't trust anyone to tell you the truth. You can't trust anyone not to turn on you or steal your food or kill you or assault you in any way. And it's very interesting to me how these characters go along and really approach this differently. So in Zombieland, we have Wichita and her little sister, scam the guys early on. They're like, oh, these two harmless women, they're kids. Pretty much. They're not going to do anything to hurt us. And they, immediately take all their guns and their car as well. That really nice Humvee. Or the really nice truck and stuff that he has. And they have to go and get that big old yellow Humvee that has the zombie hand still stuck to the steering wheel. So that can be, a lot of fun in a lot of ways. I like seeing, the girls use their own advantages to their advantage. They're like, okay, this is how I am perceived by other people, and so I'm going to use that to my advantage at this point. And, men think that I'm attractive, so I'm going to go ahead and get this over on them. I have acting skills. I'm going to use that in the zombie apocalypse to manipulate others and get what I need. It's very much, a natural progression, I think, of, reverting back to our animal instincts and focusing mostly on self-preservation in different ways. Tallahassee, enjoys killing all these zombies because he lost someone who was very important to him because of the zombies. And, we see our main character played by Jesse Eisenberg just being kind of soft, and he's like, I hope my family's okay. And then he kind of slowly comes to the realization that, family is also what you make it in this post-apocalyptic world, or they're still in the middle of the apocalyptic world. And then you see how different people from different social classes react to it. This kid has made his own rules, Columbus, Jesse Eisenberg's character, and, he's like, these are the things that keep me alive. I gotta do cardio. I gotta make sure I double tap, all that jazz. And it's fun to see him kiting the zombies too. So we kite a lot in zombie games, like video games. And I really enjoyed seeing that actually happen on the TV show, or the movie, rather. It was a blast to see that actually addressed in a movie. And it's really silly a lot of the times when you're kiting these zombies, but it can be really necessary. Or, when you're playing Call of Duty Black Ops Zombies, the second one, and you just like blow one of their legs off and it's the last one. So he has to crawl around. You got a crawler so that you have time to go to the random box and stuff like that. There wouldn't be a reason to, blow one of their legs off to go to the random box here. You would just go ahead and kill the zombie in Zombieland or The Walking Dead. But overall, I found it was really fun, and kiting was a good way to illustrate that and be funny while at the same time being like, I'm in danger, like Ralph from The Simpsons. So I really liked Zombieland a lot. People still having hope in the middle of all the crap was also really nice. Like, Wichita knows that it's probably not going to be really a haven at Pacific Playland, but she's trying to preserve her little sister's innocence for as long as she can, any semblance of it, her childhood, trying to help her hold on to that as they're growing up in the apocalypse together. And I think that is really beautiful. We see the opposite happen to Carl in The Walking Dead, where Carl is just, Carl that kills people. Like, he has to, put down his mom and everything, and it's just so rough as we watch Carl really be representative of everyone, losing his humanity along the way. Whereas Little Rock, still gets to be a kid for quite a bit of it. She gets to be upset by kid things and hope for kid things. And that's very fun when it's juxtaposed with, Carl in The Walking Dead. Now, in The Walking Dead, I really liked the comics, the graphic novels, a lot better than the turns that they took on the show in many ways. I was a really big fan of Andrea and also of Shane in the comics, and they did my girl dirty. I'm really upset about the off-screen death that Andrea got and how they made her kind of inept and a poor judge of character in a lot of ways. She was supposed to be with Rick, and she was supposed to make it through at least one more story arc, but, whatever. They decided to go ahead and get rid of her. I also love Lori as an actress because the lady who played Andrea, she was on The X-Files as Marita Covarrubias, and I was so stoked to see her on there. So they crushed me when they kind of gave her that off-screen death. So rude. But also, I really like Shane a lot. And in the comics, Shane is a much more sympathetic character. They kind of made him more of a one-dimensional bully in the TV show, and in the graphic novels and stuff. Shane was really cool, and you kind of feel bad for him. Let's face it, you guys, Lori is the real villain of The Walking Dead. That woman caused so many problems and just lied so much. She caused a lot of problems. But I digress. Lori's like my least favorite character. It doesn't matter anymore. She's dead. So there's that. I do think that they did a really good job with casting Negan, though. Oh my gosh, I love Jeffrey Dean Morgan in anything he's been in. He played my favorite character from Watchmen, the comedian. Comedian's only in the graphic novel and the movie for about 10 minutes, but he has more depth of character than any of the other characters. And Jeffrey Dean Morgan really brought that to life. That man is brilliant in anything he's ever been in. I love him as Thomas Wayne. I love him as the dad in Supernatural. Like, Jeffrey Dean Morgan is absolutely amazing as an actor, and I hope to see more of him in some more speculative fiction as we go forward. For Zombieland, I'm really stoked for Zombieland 2. I haven't been able to see it yet. And it came out while I was out on vacation with my family, I think, so I haven't gotten to actually watch it. But I'm going to see it here in a little bit when it's out on, in a capacity where I can rent it, hopefully without having to leave my home. You guys know how that is. But I will be checking that out soon so I can see more zombies and catch up with our characters and see what kind of shenanigans they get into. Also, anything that has Bill Murray in it, I'm going to love. Groundhog Day, Scrooged, I loved his cameo appearance in Zombieland. That man is just absolutely hilarious. I'm so excited that he was in that Super Bowl commercial as well. Literally anything Bill Murray is in, I will watch it. All right, guys, we're going to go on another break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about what dreaming about zombies means, just for fun.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. In our last segment, we were talking about Zombieland versus The Walking Dead and how they kind of take a juxtaposed position from each other and how they treat, elements of humanity and depersonalization in the zombie apocalypse. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what dreaming about zombies might mean. If you're like me, you tend to go, okay, yeah, I watched some zombie movies before bed. Of course I dreamed about zombies. I dreamt of zombies. However, a lot of people like Carl Jung think that our dreams are more symbolic. Anytime I describe my strange dreams about death, which are very frequent and almost nightly, to my buddy Bob, he's like, oh yeah, that's a classic anxiety dream. And my ex is also very into Carl Jung and his concepts of the shadow versus the ego, in addition to, concepts of, interpreting dreams. It can be really interesting. He was a psychology major, so that makes sense that he's quite familiar with that, and a lot more so than I was. So, regardless of whether you believe it or not, it can be fun to kind of explore what it might mean. So dreaming about zombies is often meant to just be symbolic of certain moments in your life. That's what a lot of people interpret it as. A zombie in your dream can be associated with transformation and, really things that are bothering us in our life, like things that we feel are oppressing us or stopping us from getting to what we want to get to. So they're roadblocks, whether that be to romance or to achievements in work or in our personal lives. It can be really fun, but also really scary. So if you're dreaming about zombies and possible apocalypses, then a lot of times it's representative of embarking on a new beginning, or you're feeling stressed out. So again, classic anxiety dream. A lot of people dream about being chased by zombies, and some people dream about being surrounded by hordes of zombies. Carl Jung referred to, zombies and dreams as being like a fantastical dream. And he did a lot of work on dream psychology. So for dreams about being chased by zombies, those can be, you're just stressed out and worried. If you're turning into a zombie in your dreams, then that may be linked to having trouble controlling your emotions. For dreams of protecting your home against zombies, that means a new start. If you're witnessing a zombie apocalypse, also a new beginning. If you have heard of or had a virus that makes people act like zombies, then that can be new chances. If you're fighting a zombie invasion, it could be a misunderstanding that's happening in your life and you're really thinking about it and worrying about it a lot. More anxiety. If, zombies are attacking or you're attacking the zombies, then you could be worried about something and you're trying to overcome that obstacle. If you just know someone in your dream who has been turned into a zombie or bitten by one, they say it could be a lack of understanding. If you cut off a zombie's head, poor relationships. If you kill yourself before you turn into a zombie after being bitten, that just says ill fate. I don't know what that means. That's a little bit vague, but overall, these are pretty fun. And if you see many zombies, they say it's tough love. So some people look at the zombies from biblical and spiritual perspectives, where we're looking to find peace. And the representation of the zombie is how we are feeling about ourselves at the time. Zombies are pretty much just people who are dead. And that can mean that you're feeling kind of out of control of your current environment. If you, like to be in control of things, like I do, I like to know what's going on. I don't like surprises. I don't like uncontrolled for variables. That's why I like to read a lot, so I know the things and am not caught off guard. Then, you might be dreaming about zombies a lot because they represent a lack of control. The Walking Dead in a dream really symbolizes a problem or a feeling that you can't reach a goal. There's some obstacle in your path, whether that's yourself, like you're Luke Skywalker and you walked into that cave and it's like, oh crap, I am Darth Vader. Or, you're just dealing with something in your subconscious. It can go either way. It's just zombies. If you are dreaming about zombie viruses, you might just be watching a lot of movies with zombie viruses. And you might feel like you're a little bit overwhelmed or threatened about something going on in your personal life. You can also look at it as, dreams of death causing you to, really be associating something negative that you're trying to transform and you haven't quite gotten there yet. They say that death in dreams often symbolizes like an inner transformation, and you just need to think about it a lot in order to process it and work your way through it. your brain is kind of trying to process it, but you're not quite getting there. It's really abstract. So thinking about our dreams can maybe help us to solve some problems if you're big into like dream psychology. If you have a complete transformation in death dreams, that's awesome. According to a lot of the literature, they say that it brings a negative association back as a positive one and not leaving a bunch of dead weight in your dreamscape area. That can be better achieved in lucid dreaming. So Love 2013 talks about that a little bit. And you can also do dream reentry techniques that are put forth by Wagner 2009. So check out articles on Google Scholar related to that with those authors and those years if you are more interested in that. If you're having like apocalyptic dreams, you can look at those metaphorically. A lot of it's, a rapid change in your life. It's something that's very dramatic and sudden. So a lot of times we feel like our whole world's changing. You may have lost a job or quit your job, but you haven't found another one yet and you're freaking out. Or you do have a new job and you're doing a career shift, or you're just not sure about leaving behind the known of, both the good and the bad. So coworkers that you liked and also a job that you hated and stressed you out, but you're going into the unknown, into this new job. You don't know the coworkers. You don't know what exactly this job is going to be like. And it can just be, anxiety about a change in your life. It could be going to start at a new school, whether that's college or, it's for, you're just moving with your parents and you're starting at a new elementary school or junior high or high school. Or, you're just moving across the country because you're ready for a change. It's a lot of times referred to as like being significant emotional or spiritual growth. And it happens suddenly in a lot of ways. So it makes us stressed out. And then we have weird dreams as our brains try to process it. So it's really important to also visualize trying to get the world back to a healthy state when you have end of the world dreams. That can be done with the lucid dreaming we talked about earlier, as well as trying to do dream reentry. Or you can just start a dream journal and really kind of try to process what's going on with your dream world. If you have repeated dreams of the same type, there might be a message in that too. You can think about that in the way that, this is something that's plaguing you constantly and you haven't really worked on it yet. I have some recurring dreams, and recently one of them changed a little bit. They've been exactly the same for like 10 years or more, and now it's recently changed because I've been trying to do my shadow work, like we talked about in a previous episode, and it's really made me think of things differently, and you can see that reflected in the dream as I'm kind of trying to approach my problems in a different way, and the representation of it has therefore morphed a little bit into the dream world. Now, if you have negative attachments or bad habits that you just really can't seem to kick in real life, then they might manifest in your dreams as just being something that stresses you out and having the zombies pop up. So just like we have social representations of zombies in everyday life, they can also be representative of stuff in our dreams if you're into dream psychology. Or you might have just watched too many zombie movies before you went to bed. If you do like to look for symbolism, though, you can see it in Season 2 of The Walking Dead, where Herschel, one of my favorite characters, he was keeping his barn full of walkers because he was struggling to let go of these negative events in his life. So his family members and his neighbors and stuff being turned into zombies. He wasn't able to let go of his wife or son or his neighbors, and he wasn't really emotionally processing that loss. So he was unable to recognize them for what they really were at that point. He was seeing them as they were, or not as they were. He was seeing them as he would have them be, and not as they currently were. So they were dangerous to people who were still living. They were dangerous to others. They were dangerous to Herschel himself. So in that way, our own habits can be dangerous to ourselves. They can be harmful at the very least. And we could be fighting through recognizing that these are negative components and letting them go, or letting go of negative relationships in our lives as well. So when Shane, my fave, goes ahead and opens the barn and goes in to attack all the walkers and killing them all. Like, we can look at that a couple different ways. Was Shane trying to be helpful and making sure that everyone was safe, or was he just being a jerk? It could be both, to be honest. I like to think that Shane was just putting the needs of the many ahead of the needs of the few, which would be Herschel's emotional well-being at that time. But, keeping a bunch of zombies in a barn is not really emotionally well anyway. It's kind of a bad coping strategy. So even though everybody was tense and emotional as they killed all of those zombies that were Herschel's family members and his neighbors, the characters all felt kind of a catharsis after they were killed off. They felt a lot better because they didn't have to worry about it anymore. And it was kind of processed. What's done is done at that point. So if you had a dream and you were transforming dead zombies by burning them, then that works. That means you are turning a negative into a positive. You're at least getting rid of that negative dead weight. So you don't have to worry about it anymore. So having these dreams can help you feel more empowered. It can help you feel like you are fighting your way through something to get through these obstacles and really achieve what you're looking for. But they might also just be anxiety, and you might also have just watched too many zombie movies and ate spaghetti right before bed. That interpretation is up to you, my friend. I would love to hear you guys' different opinions on it. If you have strong feelings about zombies or dreams, by hitting me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at the GSMC Sci-Fi accounts. And thank you for listening to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show, and writing a nice review always really helps us. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I'd appreciate it. Thank you kindly, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.